I had the schizophrenic patient one time, and again, in training or med school or something, and the schizophrenic patient comes in, he's in a wheelchair, and then it's all chaos, right? The guy's just talking, all sorts of chaotic stuff. And it was Halloween that night. And so I asked him, I said, it's Halloween. What do you think about Halloween? And he said, Halloween, the one night where ghouls and goblins come out and pretend to be something they're not. And I was like, and then chaos erupted once again, right? And it's just like, hold on, you just blew my mind with that statement. Can we go back to that? But obviously wasn't able to do it because treatments weren't working. But I mean, nonetheless, what do you think about this sort of like overlap? And then obviously you see publicly like Kanye West, for example, right? That's my generation of that sort of Van Gogh person. Unfortunately, his mental illness has been really public, right? But I think that his Runaway album is probably one of the best hip hop albums of all time. Personally, that's what I think. What's going on with like this overlap between mental illness and creativity?
Yeah, this is an area that actually has been studied a decent amount. So I think we've got a bit of a handle on that. And we have an article that first author Kendra Knudsen, Knudsen. Mm-hmm. So for folks who wanted to see that paper, and it involved our Big C group. But yeah, there's long been this what I'm going to call it as a myth of the link between madness and creativity. Okay. That people who are mad are more creative, et cetera. Now, clearly, if you go through, you can find examples of people who had diagnosed mental disorders and were exceptionally creative.
Outliers.
Probably. The bottom line is when we look systematically at the association of mental illness and creative achievement, what we find is people who have illnesses that are serious enough to be called illnesses, like a diagnosed mental illness, it's associated with a decrease in productivity for whatever reasons. Right. It's in some ways that you could see it almost as tautological, like it's a definition of a mental illness that it causes a disruption in functioning, in adaptive functioning.
Yeah. So
just by the way we define mental illness, it sort of defines that it cannot lead to greater creativity. However, now this is where I think the reality lies. What we see is that the first degree relatives of people who have mental illnesses show typically higher levels of creativity.
Interesting.
So here, and this supports the edge of chaos theory in my view,
right,
because what we would hypothesize is that they've inherited the genes that also led to mental illness in this other family member, but they had enough protective factors, enough things keeping them off the further reaches of chaos and closer to the edge so that they were able to do productive, useful things. So what I believe the genetic information that we see and the association suggests is that the genes and the brain organization that may lead to mental illness is also associated with creativity, so long as it does not go too far, as long as it doesn't go over the edge.
Right.
Then it probably is associated with benefits for creative cognition.
Right.
In our Big C study, what Knudsen
have you defined the Big C? You've defined the Big C. It's like
really exceptional
creativity.
creativity.
And then there's little C.
That's right. Little C is like everyday creativity.
Okay. All right.
But this, of course, has led to there's a whole literature now on all other kinds of Cs, like professional C.
Okay.
So and there's a debate. Like even for our Big C people, we developed criteria that really suggested they were outliers in their domains. Yeah. But people could argue, oh well, maybe they're just advanced professionals. Right. And then there's been other kinds of C's that have been identified.
Right. Sorry to get you off track.
Yeah, but basically I think it's what we were seeing as Big C's, exceptionally creative people who are widely acknowledged by their peers and the world as being exceptionally creative in their domains.
Yeah, and that kind of makes sense when you're thinking about you have to be obsessed, right? Like you have to be obsessed with something to do it for 10,000 hours. Like there's got, and I've said it before, right? Like anxiety isn't isn't necessarily a bad thing, right? I think I've said it the last like 3 podcasts for some reason, but like anxiety isn't necessarily a bad thing, right?
Well, anxiety wouldn't exist if it wasn't adaptive.
I had anxiety coming over here and having to talk to you all about creativity, right?
No.
But that was a good thing because now I've got like my little outline set up and everything here, right? But I mean, it's a motivating factor for me, right? It's an issue when it starts getting in the way of your relationships and life functioning and different stuff like that. But I think that lends credence to this sort of theory that you're talking about, which it's like the first family relative, right? There's a genetic maybe push towards, obsession and maybe some of these, psychological things, right? But at the same time, they're not becoming functionally debilitating where, they're not able to actually create anything because the psychological illness is just so overwhelming.
Or to more flexible thinking. You mentioned obsessionality. So there, again, if we deal with this balancing act, we can think about the concepts of stability and flexibility. Stability has got positive connotations, right? Being stable, well, that's good. But if you're too stable and you just keep doing the same thing again and again, well, that's where we get into territory. If it's dysfunctional, that we refer to as obsessive or compulsive behavior, if it's disabling enough. On the other hand, flexibility. Oh, that's a good thing, right? You want to have flexibility. But if that becomes too extreme, then what we see are disorganized psychotic states where no one else can make sense of the threads in a person's communication and thinking. So, again, there are these dimensions of stability and flexibility. They're always in balance. We have an increased good understanding of what are the brain systems governing and organizing those balancing acts. And that, I think, is the key to both mental health and creativity, is seeing the appropriate balancing of these tools and not having it go too far one way or the other.